Hi, I'm Russ Banham. I'm a long-time financial journalist and author. And with me today is Marc Hoffman. Marc is the CEO of BlackLine, an accounting and finance automation software provider. And Marc and I are going to discuss the topic, leadership in disruptive times. Marc, good to see you.
Good morning, Russ. Nice to see you again.
So my first question is, you became CEO of BlackLine in January, but in fact, you actually had begun transitioning into the role much earlier. I guess it was in the summertime that it was announced you would be succeeding Therese Tucker as BlackLine's CEO. Therese, of course, is the founder and former CEO of BlackLine. I've got to ask you, what was it like stepping into this role in the middle of the pandemic and a pretty startling economic contraction? Most other companies had put their executive moves on hold when COVID hit, and here you are effectively jumping into the frying pan as it sizzled, driving the company's response to the pandemic in mitigating the disruption to employees, the business, customers, and so on. So why did BlackLine go ahead with the change?
Yeah, it was an exhilarating year, and in some ways, it was an acceleration of a planned succession plan that we had been working on and talking about for some time. As we had got to Q1 during the board meeting, I was appointed to the board and promoted to president, and then shortly thereafter, as we began the year, the world changed significantly with the pandemic. And in times like that, in my experience, people have a couple different potential reactions. There's this fear reaction, and then there's this calmness and clarity reaction. I tend to gravitate towards that calm and clear vision of what needs to take place. And so at that time, we looked at this situation and assessed where we were and said, we need a strong voice to lead the company in these really challenging times when people were faced with fear and not knowing what's next, what's going to take place. And it just made good sense to accelerate the succession plan based on my ability to clearly articulate what our priorities were and how we were going to get ourselves, our employees, and our customers through what is a challenging 12 months now.
So, tell me a little bit more about that. Of course, the topic is leadership in disruptive times. How did BlackLine itself handle the transition to remote work on a mass basis? I would imagine certainly there might have been some sort of flexibility when it came to work, in the office and outside the office at home. But now we've got everyone working at home. This new paradigm. How did you make sure? Let's talk first about about employees. How did you set things up so they could do their jobs efficiently, productively, and deal with the kind of stress of having never done this before, all at once, possibly with children, partners, and the like at home?
Yeah, so I guess I'll just go back one step prior to that. In order to focus on employees and customers, which were our two priorities, you sort of have to stop and assess what are our priorities as an organization. Yep. And some organizations had different priorities. They were still motivated by economic outcomes, profit. At times like this, we looked at the situation and said our priorities are our employees and their families' health and safety. Very close second is our customers, our customers' success, their safety, and the continuity of their operations to close their books and run their organizations on BlackLine. And so once we started with our priorities and then started to increase our communication with people, it was a pretty fluid experience for us. So I think the next big step was making sure that we amplified our voice and communication and reinforced those things that were our priorities so they would become part of our operating system through our leaders. So we instituted a daily executive leadership call every morning to assess the news that was coming in, what direction we were going to take with our employees, what were the advice that we were getting from officials on where we could work, how we could work, and what was the safe way to operate. And then we set out a communication protocol. We looked at the scenario and we said, okay, we're arguably are in the most unique position, given what we do and how we do it as a software provider, that we can run most all of our business in a distributed fashion. So we started to send people home. We built the network of communication so that we knew how we could reach everyone, and we had escalation paths should anything unseen happen. And then we had the frequency of our daily meetings to assess where we were every time we got together. What we found out was the business operated arguably, and we had very few workers that we would consider critical must be in the office employees. What became more apparent to us was the need to build the connective tissue to offset the fact that we don't have people who can interact with one another on a daily basis just by walking by another person's office, workstation, a coffee machine, what have you. And so we really focused on the connection between employees, holding events that were digital events, communicating not only about our business priorities, about what was going on in each other's lives. Then we quickly thereafter pivoted to a series of wellness initiatives, things that made sure our whole employees' experience was looked after, not just the business experience. That's the sort of next layer. As we got on to what became a prolonged period where it was we were unclear as to how long this disruption was going to take place, then we started to see the impacts on the employees with their children, trying to learn in the same environment, perhaps not having access to caregivers, the sort of stalemate of working from home as it might impact your psychology. We made efforts to provide third-party resources from counseling, employee assistance programs, proactively put out a series of wellness activities that our employees could participate in morning exercise programs, yoga, meditation, evening and afternoon connection activities. We have employees that formed an online band and played concerts for one another, focused on teaching one another how to cook, had children come into the screen learning how to roll out pasta. Some really innovative and fun things that we were able to do to sort of bring everybody together in a very empathetic way.
I love that. I think that's those are wonderful examples there of building esprit de corps, particularly in a virtual context. Making pasta, that's fantastic. So, I've talked to other companies where remote work, did not work as well for them. And I'm curious if you have some examples maybe where things were challenging for employees, during this period.
There was things that we feared at the onset that would not work well that actually turned out to work just fine. So as we took a perspective that we have this wonderful business model of recurring revenue. We have a really well-stocked balance sheet. We're going to continue to invest specifically in some of our technology initiatives. And that meant a lot of investment in hiring. And when you try to onboard new employees and you're faced with interviewing in a completely digital world, onboarding employees, getting them set up and then trained, there was a bunch of fear about that. That was quite honestly a bit of an overreaction because those things worked well for us. The things that I would say that perhaps didn't work as well for us, some ways affect the demand environment. We do a lot of outreach as we're educating clients as to the nature of what we do and how we take unsustainable accounting processes and we modernize those things. Became very difficult to continue to execute at the same levels on the demand generation side because everybody's so used to being able to reach someone through their office, the telephone, et cetera. And now they've just skedaddled everywhere. And so that was one challenge for us. And then, of course, over time, you start to identify some areas of your business that thrive on the human interaction. Think about areas where there's a lot of knowledge sharing that goes on, where people can just learn from others' experience, where you can reach over and tap someone on the shoulders. You start to identify over time some of those areas where there's dense employee work, that knowledge sharing goes on, that you have to re-engineer the systems around that activity because people start to sort of become disconnected.
One thing we haven't talked about is your experiences during this period. In the green room, you had mentioned that you were, essentially working from two locations, Scottsdale and, of course, Los Angeles, where BlackLine is headquartered. Everyone's situation is unique. I think the viewers would be really interested in, what you found to be particularly helpful insofar as keeping up your energy and your focus, while working remotely.
Yeah, I'm a human like everybody else experienced it. And so I'm sure that you've got some funny stories that we may not want to tell on a broadcast as well about, eating everything in the house. And I focused on the behaviors and activities that caused me to show up the best as the best leader for people around me and my colleagues. And when I did a really good job at that, I was focused on empathy quite a bit. We talked about empathy and that we're all going to go through these peaks and valleys, probably so much more when we don't have the typical standard things that we do routine-wise, and travel and going to the office and going to meetings and going to clients, that we might need to just have a little empathetic, longer rope of patience with people. I focused on giving myself some grace for that as well. Sometimes I'm just not, going to show up the best way because I'll be out of my patience rope, and trying to just realize that it's a situation around me that is creating this. But if I focus on those behaviors and activities and how I show up best using those things, then I would be okay. I benefited from the occasional opportunity to come out to LA. We had some activities around investor work, things that just had to be done. That gave me the sort of change of scenery, if you will. And it's so I've benefited from some of those things. And then I benefit from being in a seat that I can interact across the entire company seamlessly. And so I was able to maintain a lot of connections with the members of the executive team, but with the other functional leaders, all the way down to all levels of the organization through various communications mechanisms. And while I love to see people in our offices or in our customers, the ability to see a bunch of squares on the screen and see some familiar faces, and that's kind of rewarding as well.
You had mentioned the uncertain demand environment for your client base, and I recall back in Q2 of last year, so many CFOs couldn't get their arms around a forecast. That in fact, several public company CFOs were issuing multiple forecasts. If this happens, well, then here's our forecast. But if that happens, here's our forecast. And given BlackLine's business in effect, I'd love your opinion on how your clients dealt with this uncertainty during the pandemic. Many companies typically rely on paper and physical offices to close the books, for example. But now there's no paper, no physical offices. Where did BlackLine's clients maybe differentiate themselves in terms of their ability to close the books?
So I think you're absolutely right. And many public companies chose to pull back guidance for the year, given the uncertainty. And then, as you mentioned, we did the same thing. We created multiple scenarios of potential outcomes that drove what we believe the demand environment to be, and then our associated P&L off of that. So we would make sure that we had the financial discipline to sustain our employees, invest in the business, and emerge stronger. One of the areas that we were really focused on was our customers. And so there was a lot more customer interaction and outreach during that time frame to assure them of the continuity of our service and availability of our staff and expertise when they were going through these difficult times. We launched a number of initiatives where we took our experience with our technology and the best ways to do perhaps close your books for the first time in a completely remote environment. And so we packaged that up and provided that on a complimentary basis to our clients. The same sort of experience with running the concept of running your first audit in a remote concept in distributed work. We packaged that up and put that in the hands of our clients. We gave free access to a number of our products for a period of time to customers to sort of get them through those times. What I heard from conversations with customers were gratefulness of the relationship and the supporting nature that we had as a provider, that they were confident that the continuity of our ability to support them and operate the business, the advisory services that we were providing to them. And then the other piece I heard sort of broke down depending on what industry they were in. I spent a fair bit of time talking with the controllers and CFOs of our hospitality clients. We have a number of hotel chains, big brands, and they were particularly impacted. And so they were looking at ways that they could work with us to continue to support and invest in their digital finance transformation and use of our software while they were managing their bench, because they're looking at their occupancy levels in their hotels, they're managing staff levels through furlough and other activities, and they still have to run all of the things they have to run as a governed and compliant public company. And so what we saw was a lot of different outcomes. Every single month that we went through the pandemic, the demand environment got a little bit more clear. We got a little bit more visibility as broader parts of the economy started to return, and people felt like this wasn't going to be a pandemic measured in weeks. It was going to be measured in months, perhaps year plus, and that they had to continue to find ways investing in modernizing their accounting, because they learned that what they were doing already in light of the pandemic was unsustainable.
Well, two questions actually here. One is, I love what you were just talking about. I'm curious if possibly there are some other, examples of how BlackLine, assisted its finance and accounting customers, in effect, through the pandemic. But also, I read here in some of the materials provided me that the company's motto is think, create, serve. And I was hoping maybe you could elaborate on that.
Yeah, that's been a long-standing motto for us. In fact, it's we have these neon lights and this great wide, big open space that we have on one of the floors of our building, and it's sort of in the ceiling, so everybody gets to walk by it. And we talk about them frequently. Just that, but we focused a bit on particular items of that motto during the pandemic. The serve one was sort of the first thing that you had to be focused on. You had to really pivot back to your priorities. What are our priorities? We need to serve our employees, one another, make sure we're safe. We need to make sure we serve them so we can provide them productive places to work from. We need to serve our employees. Then we had to create. We had to very rapidly create content based on the IP that existed in our employees' head from years of experience and 3,500 customers. How do we take that and quickly package it and get it in the hands of our customers during these trying times. And then we constantly had to be thinking about creative ways to solve problems that came out of things that none of us ever expected. And so I think the pandemic gave us a unique opportunity to remind us of those values and force us to focus on how we can apply those things in 2020. It was sort of refreshing because oftentimes organizations put those things on the wall and then they're sort of gathering dust and forgotten about. And we had the opportunity to live them in 2020.
That's great. Also in 2020, I'm curious, if there was any trends in terms of how companies were using technology like automation software in finance and accounting, and whether or not that may have changed for this, for the future because of the pandemic. I wrote a story in CFO magazine, I guess maybe it was about 5-6 months ago, in which I interviewed CFOs, including your own CFO, about closing the books virtually. And it was clear that companies with automation software in that context were able to do it more efficiently, certainly a lot faster than the other CFOs I interviewed that were doing things in a more manual and spreadsheet type environment. So, I mean, do you think we've sort of passed this threshold in terms of the use of automation technology?
Well, I think it'll certainly be a catalyst for people who have not yet passed that threshold. Mm-hmm. And that is a striking difference. Those that had already digitized all of the tasks involved in closing their books. The close is a series of tasks that are sort of issued per your policies and your controls that you exhibit, that you can enforce. And when you have those written and distributed across an organization in various ways, there's not a common sense of what they are, who's responsible for what, and how they get executed, and where you are at any given moment in time. And when you digitize and you control and you provide visibility through a system of record like ours, that becomes a striking difference, especially when it's exposed to the stress of a pandemic and remote work. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing. That was sort of the haves and have-nots, if you will. And I think that the have-nots clearly identified that they must do something. The other piece of it is it just sort of through the challenges of managing bench, labor, unique employee-related things, it highlighted the additional burden on CFOs and controllers of capacity and how the work that gets done in a manual, unsustainable world that's not yet automated and streamlined and modernized can wear people out and do not allow them to sort of future-proof their accounting processes. And that causes people significant challenges to take and harness capacity in the accounting function that could be utilized to fulfill the strategic vision of the CFO and the CEO of the organization. And there's another big sort of striking difference. Those that can harness that capacity because they've modernized are better apt to respond to an environment like this than those who are not.
One other thing too, that we're sort of BlackLine, but traditional trends, and it has to do with M&A. Certainly in the second quarter, it just ground to a standstill. Nobody knew, what lay ahead financially. I mean, even consumers. I closed up my wallet and gradually began to open it. But BlackLine at that time was pursuing its acquisition strategy, and indeed it culminated in the acquisition of Rimilia. I guess maybe in early fall. I'm curious, well, first of all, what Rimilia is, and I guess the value proposition it brings to BlackLine and certainly by extension, its customers, and maybe even, enhance BlackLine's value proposition to customers.
Yeah, that's a great question, Russ. So let me just start with how our business was thinking at the time the pandemic hits us. We got focused on our priorities, employees, customers. then our founder, myself, our CFO get together and say, okay, what are we going to do now to make best use of this time, this unknown that we have ahead of us? And so we chose to invest in our business. We have a great balance sheet, got a beautiful business model. And we had a desire to create additional value for our clients in some adjacency. And so we had a list of things that were actions we could do. And cash just was such a priority for businesses anyway. It becomes heightened when there's business challenges in an environment, pandemic and economic activity. People want to understand how the state of their own balance sheets, where their cash is, how it's being collected against receivables, how it's being applied to accounts so they can make best use of that capital. And so that's what led us to the Rimilia acquisition, which we conducted. They're a great company, great technology in the AR automation space, specifically helping people collect and apply the cash that sits unallocated on a balance sheet. About 100 employees, great management team that joined us starting in Q4, and we're thrilled with the opportunity to invest in that business, offer it to the BlackLine clients through our vast distribution network.
Thank you. Just like I was just thinking this, just like Joe Biden, you're also in your first 100 days as CEO. You sort of started right around the same time. I'm curious about the future now. 2021. We've talked a lot about 2020, the challenges and opportunities. What would you like to say to both BlackLine customers, partners, employees, and other stakeholders about 2021?
Yeah, I'd say you're going to see a lot more of some elements of the same value system that we've talked about, the same way, the culture of our organization, the same performance of our employees, which are very customer-centric and centered on serving one another. We had a number of multi-year growth initiatives in place, and they all focus around serving the customer. You're going to see more of those things. We felt like they served us well. As we went into 2019, we were accelerating the growth of the business. And when we accelerate the growth of the business, it accelerates our ability to invest in our organization to both support and build new technology for our clients. I think that those initiatives served us well during the pandemic, and they're going to serve us well in the future as the demand environment improves in front of us. And then lastly, we have a lot of aspirations for what the potential of this company is. We're still in the early innings of the core market that we pioneered, the closed process automation space. We've just added additional capability in the accounts receivable automation space, and we're investing in that business and its people to serve our clients. And then we have aspirations for much more really focused on how do we continue to serve the controller, modernize the accounting processes that have been unsustainable for many years and not invested in, that the controller is concerned about. So we're pretty excited about the future and potential of BlackLine based on that strategy and our ability to invest with the right team we have.
Well, that's just great stuff, Marc. I can't thank you enough for taking the time to chat today, and I look forward to going back into the green room with you and discussing some of those unusual things that happened to us all in this past really challenging year. Thank you very much again.
Yeah, nice to see you, Russ. Hopefully we'll do it in person sometime in 2021. Take care.
You too.